You get the security and you get the convenience of persistent identity, right? So you put this on once a day, right, or once a week if you want to wear it persistently, and then until you take it off, it still knows that it's you.
So right now, that's a very secure, but you know, I think there's a lot of single-purpose wearables not delivering a lot of utility. I would probably put you guys into single-purpose wearable delivering one valuable thing, but the goal isn't over time that it would be a separate wearable, is it?
So the goal is to create a platform. And so our first device has a lot of the functionality you'd find in things like activity trackers and you know, motion controlling devices. And so we will have some of that functionality, but the core of the platform is identity. And so, you know, depending on whether it's our own device that ends up encompassing a lot of the other functionality that you see in other wearables, or whether our functionality is embedded in another device, we feel like the same way that there are health tracking platforms that are starting to emerge. There are notification context-aware platforms like what Google's trying to do with Android. We think there's the opportunity to create a wearable platform with the foundation in identity.
But you guys could certainly see yourselves being integrated into somebody else's wearable.
It's possible. It's possible. I mean, there's been a lot of interest from folks, and so you know, depending on how things play out, the goal is really to drive a compelling end user experience. And so the easiest way for us to prove that out is to kind of create a completely controlled, vertically integrated experience to start, and then you know, as the ecosystem develops, there are a bunch of different potential outcomes.
Cool, Stephane. Talk about, because MasterCard's actually been in the non-card payment business for a long time. I remember I forget the name of it, PayPass, is it, that you swiped at the gas pump, and NFC and stuff, and talk about kind of how you guys are thinking about where wearables fit in, where all these sort of new technologies, phones even.
Sure, yes, I mean, you know, it's great to actually come to a conference and talk about the wearable space, and we, within MasterCard, really always are interested in exploring new technologies, new solutions that are really going to help enhance what we call the future of commerce. So it really extends beyond simply just the payment, the additional capabilities that really add to the underlying consumer experience. So wearables is exactly in that space. There's a lot of things that are being tested at the moment. So I think that's where we're sort of looking at, you know, where are ways that we can maybe get plugged in or help, and really ensure there's sort of two things that will remain, which is consistent with why payments are really effective today. One is obviously security, always making sure you're delivering the most secure transaction. And the second part is ultimately the experience standpoint. So that means it's really creating seamless, simple ways for consumers to use the devices. But also I sort of go back to the acceptance side as well. It's only as useful as where you can actually use it. So in the same way that a physical piece of plastic is only good if there's a merchant that accepts it, it's the same concept when you look at the wearable space as well in terms of what are those use cases that are getting developed. So you know, similar to some of the other areas we're looking at, we're really sort of exploring, looking at the space, seeing how it evolves, and ultimately, you know, anything that helps drive security for consumers, anything that drives that future of commerce, is something that we think is very valuable.
We hear a lot of talk about mobile payments and the promise of it, and yet, you know, it really hasn't taken off significantly. I mean, Starbucks does a tremendous amount through its mobile app directly. There have been some, you know, nibbles in this area. Why hasn't it taken off, and do wearables sort of help this, or just present another area for mobile payments to have promise but not take off?
I mean, it's a great question. I think a lot of it is, it's, you know, still relatively early. There isn't necessarily an industry standard yet. A lot of it ties to the consumer adoption side. So what is the ultimate solution, be it a mobile wallet, be it a wearable device, that the average consumer will say, this is my choice, my preferred choice. And that gets you into some of the elements that would drive why that would work. So the issuance side, so again, similar, I always refer back to the payments model. Getting as many devices out to as many consumers is an important step. The acceptance side, which I touched on before, so getting as many merchants enabled with be it BLE, be it NFC, whatever the acceptance mechanism is. And then the third part is ultimately the use case. There's got to be a pain point you're solving for a consumer. It's got to be better than the way they do it today. So I think wearables and mobile wallets are probably similar in that extent. There's no industry standard yet. There's lots of different things that are being tested, and I think it's going to be really interesting as it evolves, you know, as we see more consumers, you know, pivot towards one versus the other.
Yeah, I think the value proposition that you mentioned last is, you know, in my opinion, part of the reason why mobile wallets haven't taken off, because the advantage that I get over pulling out my card, versus the friction of pulling out my phone, unlocking my phone, finding an app, launching it, confirming a payment, maybe putting in a PIN code. The benefit that I get from that doesn't really outweigh the extra friction that goes in. And so I think that's where the opportunity, if you design a compelling experience involving a wearable where it is truly seamless, you can actually overcome that hurdle. And it's like, okay, it's actually much easier than me ever having to interact with a point of sale system, right? I could just pick something up, it knows that it's me, and I can walk out of the store and I've paid for it.
And Apple, for example, is one of the few places I've seen so far really do that. Again, most of the people, and I want to get back to why the people that are doing it outside the traditional payments, even if they accept traditional forms of payment. So Apple, for those, I don't know, how many people know that you can go into an Apple store, pay for it with the app, and walk out without ever dealing with a retail person? So a few people. I mean, it's really a different experience. You feel like you should tell somebody. Like you feel like you've stolen. By contrast to, I don't know how many people have used like self-checkout at like a grocery store or a Kmart or something. It's a really challenging experience that usually goes wrong. This is like frictionless.
Yeah.
So it strikes me that there's three different pieces to this, and we're still trying to crack all of them. There's the technology piece, there's the security piece, and the business piece. On the security piece, and this is certainly where you guys come in, it strikes me that there's kind of no question that technology can offer a better solution. I mean, we have two really broken models that form the heart of most payments. If it's an online-only transaction, we use really, passwords, which we've seen over the last two years, are very insecure. They're hacked. They're all these things. If we're in the physical world, at least in the U.S., we use, swipe and signature, which is, I think it's only the business side of things that makes this pay off. The fact that fraud is still a relatively low percentage of a profitable business, but it's fairly. Would you agree that the security day is pretty poor?
So, I think for security specifically, when you look at the in the physical space, the push towards EMV is a great example of that. So the US, that's something that's being rolled out today. Majority of the leading retail banks are rolling out EMV-enabled cards.
Sorry, a little jargony. EMV.
It's Europay, MasterCard.
The chip and pin.
Exactly.
So
It's essentially the chip that's embedded within the card that forces me to essentially type a PIN. The security is held in the actual card itself. So it's a more secure way to pay. I think the key thing about EMV and security in general is it's really an industry requirement. It requires multiple stakeholders to come together. So that's where we're working with Visa to roll out the EMV components, working with the merchants, working with the issuers. Really to go after security, it's a fundamental point. It's got to be the entire ecosystem that works to try and resolve it.
But aren't there, chip and pin is a step over what we have, but aren't there things like what Andrew's working on? The fact that I have my smartphone or a wearable is actually a really good indication that I am who I say I am. The fact that I have my heartbeat is probably a really good indication. How much are you guys investing in those technologies, and how do they become mainstream?
So the biometric space, and this is one thing that Andrew sort of touched on. Sort of the value there is getting to sort of persistent identity. It's sort of getting to a very unique way to authenticate somebody, very specific to me as an individual. So again, we're looking at a variety of different areas. We're sort of saying, how would that work, and testing it within a payment environment or a commerce environment. Again, I don't think there's a defined standard in what is the ultimate biometric capability, be it retina, be it voice recognition, be it fingerprint, or be it your heartbeat. But ultimately, it's anything that's driving towards ensuring there's always security and it's at the individual customized level is a benefit. My heartbeat is unique to me, and Andrew's heartbeat is unique to himself.
Yeah, and I think where the technology can come and augment it is there's essentially a spectrum of trust, right? And so what we say is, look, you've got your heartbeat, you've got your NIMI, you've got your smartphone in proximity, and maybe you've authenticated in the same place you authenticate every morning. So we trust that it's the likelihood that it's you is very high. And this is how Stephane knows this. The fraud recognition works. If I pay for something in Brussels one morning and then in San Francisco in the afternoon, there's a flag that goes up, right? And so it's really about a spectrum of trust, and we have all these proxies to establish that trust, which are not great and introduce points of friction. So ultimately, the interesting stuff, and this is not just the payment and the transaction, but the commerce, the business, the communication that happens between trusting parties becomes much more interesting once we've established the trust. And so at Bionym, what we're trying to do is say, how can we get to that level of trust faster?
So one of the things that happened this week, and I'm curious both of your takes on this, is Apple has had Touch ID, which is probably the most liked biometric system. I don't know how widely used, but probably the most liked. I mean, fingerprint technology has been around for decades and is generally not that well enjoyed. People like Touch ID. What does it mean? What do you guys take away from the fact that Apple is now opening this up to be more than just a way to unlock your phone and a way to make purchases from iTunes itself? So for you guys, it's a competitor, but it's...
Well, look, I think it's a movement in the right direction, right? The introduction of Touch ID with the 5S was great because it showed the consumers were willing to use a biometric to represent themselves, right? There's something about me that is a better proxy for me than a username or password. If they had introduced this and there was a huge recoil and consumer backlash, that would have been worse for us. So the idea that biometrics are kind of coming into mainstream is excellent. I think the next step is still that persistence, right? Because the iPhone still only knows that it's me when my finger is on that finger pad. As soon as I take it off, I could have left my phone somewhere. So then there's a decaying trust, right? Okay, it was me 0.5 seconds ago, it was me 10 seconds ago, it was me 10 minutes ago. How often do I have to do that? And so that's, I think, the next phase.
So the way yours works, I've authenticated, and it knows that I haven't left your wrist.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And so I think that's really where you can start to design compelling experiences. I can walk into a airport terminal, and they know it's me as soon as I've walked in. I can walk into a retailer, and they know it's me. If I've given them permission to know it's me. And so that's where you can shift the experience and create kind of those really kind of magical consumer moments with the introduction of persistent identity.
Stephane, what for MasterCard? I mean, is this a new opportunity for payments?
I mean, I think it's the Andrew sort of touched on a lot of it. It's the first step. So the first step was the 5S and the benefit of me pulling out my phone, and I could call my wife by just holding down the thumbprint, unlocking the phone, and using her name through Siri. That was sort of the first experience I had from a consumer standpoint. I think this would sort of through the Apple announcement is expanding the use cases where you test out fingerprint or biometric authentication to try different experiences. I think that's where I sit within MasterCard Labs, which is the innovation arm of the company. I think it's really interesting to watch how consumers will react, what they'll ultimately adopt, where else they'll be willing to use a fingerprint within another experience outside of simply just unlocking my phone. So I think it's a really interesting space, and we'll be closely watching that.
So Touch ID brings me actually to what I think is one of the most important things in mobile payments, which is it's not always about technology. It's often about the business model. And it strikes me that one of the big things holding up mobile payments isn't the security, isn't the technology, because there are actually multiple ways of doing it that are secure, convenient, but everyone seems to want a piece of the business, and how does that get worked out? So, in the old world, Visa and MasterCard, there's kind of an accepted method, and you guys get a pretty nice chunk of change, and it's pretty good business for you guys. And I think everyone, as they eye mobile payments, is like, well, how can I get a small slice of that? And the result of that is, at one point, the carriers wanted a slice, and carrier billing, and the Apples and Googles of the world have wanted a slice. How does that get ironed out?
In terms of how the ending up to the one solution that works for a mobile wallet,
or just how do you get from a place where we have some pretty good technology options, but my sense is that MasterCard doesn't necessarily want to give up what it gets from a transaction. Consumers aren't going to pay 6% so that the carrier can have 2% and Apple can have 2%, and MasterCard can have 2%. And the solutions we've seen be successful either use the status quo or are less expensive. How do we solve some of the business side problems, and how much of what you're looking at in innovation isn't just about technology, it's about business models?
Well, I mean, I think there's there's a lot of different business models, particularly on the mobile wallet space, that are being tested out, and I think that's where it comes down to kind of the value proposition. So Starbucks works. That's a very interesting model because it's a very specific use case where there's high amounts of frequency and volume. The one thing I sort of use is nobody really wakes up, unless you're me, and thinks about payments. The only part you really think about payments is when it stops working. So within the Starbucks model, payments is embedded. It's an integral part of that experience. But the overall kind of value proposition from a consumer standpoint, the business model, is anchoring additional services, the geolocation, the loyalty, the other offers. I think that's the portion around how do you create a platform that has, obviously, payments will continue to be at the core of that platform, but build other experiences that are going to be relevant to the consumer, and ultimately that would maybe trend towards adoption.
Yeah, I think you know, just building on the Starbucks example, you know, the two ways you think about you know, creating a compelling business model are value creation, value capture, right? And most people that have tried to solve the mobile payments problem have focused on the value capture side, right? There's value here in enabling a payment, and I want a piece of it. I think the next generation of payment solutions and commerce solutions should really focus on how do you create more value for the merchant, a better experience for the consumer, where you're actually, you know, maybe you're creating a higher, you know, transaction. You're creating better inventory measurement for the merchant, you know, more efficiencies, so that there's actually a bigger pie.
So why hasn't there been more success here? I mean, why haven't, with all the investment from the Groupons of the world that are trying to build, you know, attract customers, to the people that are trying to do mobile payments, you know, there's Level Up and some of these others, to the traditional payments players, it seems like there's a huge amount of existing value to capture. You know, if you can grow a company's small business, there's a huge amount of value. Why haven't there been more successes here?
I mean, it's you know, the hardest way to handle the hardest part of that is the fact, you know, being able to predict what consumers like is a very, very hard thing to do. And that's why, you know, I go back to sort of the three factors I think about that need to come together. You know, the technology side, getting the hardware out in front of as many people to actually be able to use it. The value proposition we've talked a lot about, so it's got to be a compelling reason. It's got to be, very simply put, better than the way it's done today, which either means you make it more efficient, more convenient, or you add a number of other kind of additional services that the consumer wouldn't have otherwise had before. And then the third part is then, you know, getting that kind of the actual usage side on the acceptance piece, getting as many locations where you can use it. That's sort of, you know, I think if you can have those three elements come together, that's, you know, to some degree the recipe for a successful mobile wallet. The challenge is a lot of things that are being tested.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of inertia, and I think you know, you can't really underestimate just the things that drive consumers. You know, Apple's done a great job of just the design, right, and the fact that it's, you know, it's a status symbol. It was seeded with the right group of people, and it means something about me when I use, you know, this device to accomplish a certain task. And I think that's going to be, especially because we're in a wearables you know, event, I think that is going to be something that, you know, it right now is an afterthought. You know, what does it look like? What does it say about me? You know, what does using this device mean for my life and how I project myself into the world? I think that needs to be much earlier in the experience design conversation for this to really resonate with consumers.
Cool. Well, it's a great start to the conversation. I hope it's given everyone some at least questions to think about. Now, you guys are in security. You guys are in payments. Have you guys thought about talking together and doing something?
So, I mean, you know, again, I think a lot of it is just, you know, we, from MasterCard's perspective, we, you know, engage, and that's the role that I actually play with the MasterCard, is working with early stage startups. I think there's always an interest for, you know, for MasterCard to see who people that are driving the future of innovation, the future of commerce. How can we really help enable that? You know, so I think that's always something just broadly that we do as a company.
Yeah, I mean, we enable a platform, or an identity platform, right? So we work with everything from early stage developers that want to integrate identity into their applications to, you know, Fortune 100 companies from every vertical, from kind of payments, hospitality, retail, automotive, home automation. And so yeah, we're kind of opening up the platform and seeing what people create.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Andrew. Thanks.
Thank you.
Stephane. Thank you, guys.
Great.